Thanks very much, Andy. Pleasure to be here once again for the 6th year running, and congratulations to you and the team on a great job, how we've managed to move to this new way of interacting in this difficult situation. So a very good morning to Excellency Machunga, Honourable Ministers, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols being observed. It's a great pleasure for me to be once again to be here and to chair this tremendous event in these really quite difficult times. By way of setting the scene and opening for this event, I really want to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 and really the post-COVID-19 recovery, how there's going to be a number of clear converging pressure elements that are going to impact the energy and natural resources industries. And those two elements, one is energy itself and the demand therefore, and the type of energy that we're going to have to produce, and also the environment and the impact on the environment that our mineral resource and mining operations are going to have, and the greater focus on environmental and social governance. So, you know, stepping back, if we look at the economy at large and where is the focus? Well, the focus is going to be on GDP recovery, literally on a global basis. I mean, unemployment are now at the highest levels in history, or at least since the 1930s global depression. And typically 25% to 35% is now the current unemployment rate in the G20 countries. There's a huge need for global social security and support for the unemployed. We're facing a massive reset to the medical system and the CDC, Center for Disease Control, which certainly affects the mining industry, given the remoteness of many of our operations. And behind that, we're facing massive structural adjustment and reform for fiscal stimulus packages at levels, frankly, we've never seen before. And this is, in particular, is going to hit hard on the developing world, particularly Africa, our continent and the African countries. Effectively, I think we have to realize that we're facing a reset of the financial system. I mean, we've seen implementation of this new term, MMT, or modern monetary theory, where the central banks are printing money to cover fiscal stimulus. There's much talk about the forgiveness of debt of the developing world within the IMF and the World Bank and the G7 central banks. And I have no doubt in my mind that that's going to come in order to enable the world to recover, and in particular the developing economies. And then on the back of that, we're looking at potentially in the years to come, replacement of paper money with a new electronic unit of credit and control through the Internet of Things and blockchain. And all these things are going to impact on mine developers and mine operators and in general in the energy and natural resources industry. It's very clear if one listens to what's happening, follows not only mainstream press but also elsewhere on the internet, that the global leaders outside China are also making a lot of noise in this post-COVID-19 reset. Whether it's President Trump or Putin in Russia or Shinzo Abe in Japan, Boris Johnson in the UK, and many others of the European leaders, you know, we're all facing a newfound cultural nationalism and investment at home to accelerate recovery of their own economies. There's a general striving for less reliance on China as the ultimate consumer. And we've seen, obviously, increasing social unrest across the world. And this is very much inequality focused and pushed by political elements in order to gain power. In Africa, which obviously is the focus of our event, you know, we're seeing some key trends as well, in particular in the Christian dominant jurisdictions like Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, even the DRC, and to some extent South Africa. We see quite a bit of resource nationalism still prevalent, and even clear mortgaging of natural resources in the ground to China. There's still a focus on empowerment in some areas, a striving for, under the banner of equity or greater equity, and also improved imposition of unrealistic taxation and royalties in some jurisdictions. And all of these are going to impact us more and more in the decade to come. Another thing that's going to impact is regional conflicts. And even though they appear to be far away, like the Middle Eastern conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Iran and Afghanistan versus Iraq, etc. These countries are major players in the mineral resource world and generally have produced for their own internal uses. But they now, because they need to boost trade, they're likely to enter the global market, and that's could impact on rebalancing of the cycle and pricing going forward. So regional conflicts in general are going to have an impact on our industry, and we need to be aware of those. Another major impact for our industry is oil supply. I mean, clearly there's no shortage in the market. In fact, there's a massive glut. We've already seen oil prices earlier this year reach negative territory. In other words, they were actually paying people to take their oil. We've continued to see US growing production and exports. And so with lower consumption on the back of the COVID-19 recovery, which, let me be clear, is going to take years. This is not going to be a massive V-shaped recovery as some people are predicting. I think they're frankly delusional. It's going to take a long time, and that's going to bring, great price stability long-term to oil. I mean, probably in the region of around $45 a barrel, which is great for the mining sector. Input of oil supply through diesel and so on is a very high cost element in the operating cost base. So that's going to enable operations which would otherwise be uneconomical to produce and survive. We're seeing other trends like, the Russians, for instance, they're suffering dramatically because of this low oil price. And so they're being very expansionist in other commodities and other commodities that in our area, such as energy fuels, i.e. uranium and thermal coal, and also water rights. Certainly there's going to be I see a clear trend towards the guarding of water rights, and that's going to be very, very crucial to our industry for development of our industry in Africa. And then if we look at the energy mix, well, no matter what anyone says, it's very clear and even supported by the latest reports from the International Energy Authority that coal will remain as the dominant, as the baseload energy fuel. And while on a global basis, it may move from 50% of the energy mix to 40% probably over the next 10 years, clearly in Africa and in Southeast Asia, it will continue to remain at a very high level, probably closer to 70 to 80%. Nuclear future, that's definitely secure, and uranium will boom once again. Probably will grow from around 10% of energy supply to 20% over the next 10 years, purely and simply because the realization has come back that nuclear power is in fact intrinsically safe, and the latest technologies available are even more so. So another element to the energy mix is liquid natural gas. That's probably going to be stable. But on the renewable front, this is going to be the fastest growing. At the moment, it's still only about 6% of the total energy market worldwide, but it's likely to grow to about 20% over the next decade. And that's going to be massively positive for the development of energy metals and anything related to the production of renewable energy generation stations and storage, etc., grid storage. Further, if we want to look at the capital, I mean, obviously it's massive amounts of capital are going to be needed to develop our industry, but we are seeing a trend, and I believe it will continue to flow capital from the major G7 economies into the African continent to capture green-related resources and metals, and to try and counter this Chinese impact, where the Chinese are buying as much as they possibly can within the African soil. There's certainly growing contrarian investment in mining and energy and construction for green manufacturing, also on the African continent. And we're looking at integrated value chains where we not only produce the metals here and no longer export them as raw metal, but we go all the way through to the final battery metal sulfate, for instance, that will go into the manufacture of batteries, for electric vehicles, batteries for power walls, for localized supply systems, and then even for later for grid storage. Certainly, I think we're facing increased investment at home in the green economy. Out of this COVID-19, we're going to see a greater focus and policy making around that, and all this is positive for the energy and mining industry. There'll certainly be more exploration to find new resources, and there's going to be a lot of new technology applied, in particular artificial intelligence in exploration. And then there's going to be quite a significant, I believe, amount of focus on the control of precious metals, mining and flow of precious metals within countries and within regions. Obviously, in particular, gold, silver, and platinum fall into that category. We're also going to see palladium and platinum repositioning to quite a large degree as energy metals. Both are fundamental elements to many of the energy storage unit technologies that are being manufactured and are being proposed for the future. Platinum in particular in fuel cells, and the major platinum companies in Africa are very much front and center in that particular technology. And then we come to the subject of ethics and ethical production. This is very much coming to the fore, and I'm quite sure that our friends and partners at the African Union are going to be involved in that whole question of the production of ethical copper, nickel, cobalt, etc., given that the major consumers of those elements, such as Tesla and others, are demanding that production of these elements are done on an ethical basis, i.e. no child labor, etc., etc. There's a lot of, I would say, propaganda about this and the amount of ethical production from Africa. But I think we need a lot of more public relations on this issue, and I'm sure that working together as an industry and with our partners, the African Union, we can get the right message out there. Certainly vanadium and manganese are also going to be very much at the front. And of course, South Africa is the largest producer of those and has the largest resources and reserves in the world. And those are going to be focused on grid storage for baseload power through the deployment of the redox flow-through battery. And then we mustn't discount thermal coal for energy generation, as I said earlier, for baseload power, and also liquid fuels. Uses of coal, or the greening of coal, is very much going to come to the fore in the next few years as an attempt to green coal and also to extract aromatic materials from the coal, which are used in liquid organic hydrogen technologies, which of course are seen as very much part of the green economy going forward. And last of all, let's not forget uranium. Africa has some of the largest uranium resources in the world. And in fact, very few people realize that up until around 1984, South Africa was still the biggest uranium supplier in the world. That was then substituted by other countries such as Namibia, and then other countries came to the fore and started supplying on a more global basis out of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and so on. So these are all, very much central issues that we're going to be facing with as an industry, but we're certainly looking to our partners, the African Union, who I'm sure will have continued and increasing importance in economic development and financial governance in our industry, promoting and driving the governments within the African Union to implement fast-track mineral resources, public relations and management for investment, focusing on technology and deployment for economic expansions, etc., etc. And certainly a large focus on development of precious metals, base metals, and energy minerals. We're going to face increasing growth rates in Africa, domestic consumption demand, and certainly an opportunity for substitution to China of traditionally Western exports. So lots of things to be positive about Africa going forward. Although some of the major economies in Africa, such as South Africa, continue to be on the fence economically and financially and seem to be torn between the East and the West as far as propagating relationships are concerned to develop the mineral and energy economy. I mean, COVID-19 really has created the perfect cover for much of what could and is likely to follow in the next 10 years in terms of changes to the monetary system and how that's going to impact the development of our industry. So I think we really need to, be awake and keep alive to exactly what's happening there, because it's certainly going to have an impact for us. The whole world has changed forever, and we're going to need to be awake to all those elements. There's been a big bull market in precious metals recently, as we've seen, but this bull market has been, decades in the making. I mean, actually since 1971, when gold was disconnected from paper currency by President Nixon. But today, sentiment and the prevalent narrative is to reverse that, in fact, because especially gold and silver are sound money and seen as sound money. You have the Swiss central bank coming forward now, and in fact formally have registered gold officially again as money, which is a new precedent, and it looks like the IMF and other central banks are likely to be doing the same. So countries in Africa that can produce significant amounts of precious metals are going to have a strong anchor and stability for their economy. I mean, it has to be noted that gold supply on a global basis increases at only 1.5 to 2% per annum, and around 25% of that is currently produced and held in China. So it's really not possible for a rapid response to demand for gold, because the cycle is so long for new mines, typically 8 to 10 years for known resources, and 15 plus for those that are greenfield or being discovered. And so, with that in mind, that's why you're seeing this demand, and we're going to continue to see upward pressure on the price of gold and silver. If we look at other sectors, in particular base metals, I mean, the base metal story is clearly an energy story, and an industrial manufacturing of what I loosely call stuff story. I mean, the population explosion we've seen over the last 100 years or so, linked with technology advancement, logistical and economic access, this has really transformed demand cycles and curves, and in many cases to levels which are approaching exponential. And we have an industry that typically and historically is slow to change and slow to move. And I think these are some of the trends that we need to be aware of as we develop our businesses going forward. And then, of course, if you add to this the growing political narrative that's driven the anti-pollution sentiment and the constant push for the green economy by any means, including disinformation, misinformation, and absolute fraudulent lobbying practices, regarding untruths. And you now have a situation where almost every base metal commodity will be in a serious deficit by 2024. This deficit would have been manifesting itself already were it not for COVID-19 and really the slowdown or stoppage of industrial activity. So going forward, we're certainly going to see a steady and slow rise over the next 5 to 10 years. And certainly demand is going to outstrip supply very quickly of these commodities. So this is a major opportunity for us as an industry, and for us as certainly as African business and with our partners in Africa, to be able to develop our ability to fill this gap and fill this supply demand. There still remains, of course, at the moment, large deficits and high prices for the critical metals like nickel, cobalt, and of course copper, and these are going to continue to go up. If we look at some of the, just to give some perspective on critical materials, I mean, just looking at King Copper over the next 10 years, I mean, the current market is about 23 million tons, which is about 10 times the nickel market. And these passenger electric vehicles that's being pushed very, very heavily use 80 kilograms more copper than internal combustion vehicles. So with that means that if we produce EVs and want to adopt them at the rates that the politicians wish, then we're going to need at least 2 million tons of new copper capacity by 2023 and 4 million tons by 2030 or earlier. So that's about, close to 17 or 18% of the 2017 supply. Where's it going to come from, I ask you? Well, Chile has resource and water problems. Peru has civil war. The DRC has risky and peaking logistics. Zambia is slow to move. These are all things that we need to take into account. And a great could potentially be negatives, but on the flip side are massive positives for our economy if we manage our industry well. And really the incentive pricing for new development in copper is currently sitting, you know, around $11,000 a ton. And we're quite some way away from that at this point in time, being under $7,000 a ton. I mean, other critical materials like nickel has a similar story. It's 1/10 of the size of the copper market, but with the demand for and changing technology in batteries to consume more nickel, we're going to see a massive demand for class 1 nickel, and we're going to need to add at least 2 million tons of new production. So that's double the current class 1 nickel market, you know, over the next at least 5 to 10 years. So these are the sorts of nice pressures to have in the industry. We know that our continent is rich in these metals, and therefore a great opportunity to develop our national and continental economies. In terms of bulk infrastructure commodities also, I mean, its future is very much tied to the massive potential infrastructure investment by countries as they continue to give fiscal stimulus and reboot their economies. Again, a big positive for those commodities on the African continent. We're very rich in iron ore, for instance. We're very rich in bauxite for aluminium production. Again, a positive. So really all these things are we're looking at a strong renaissance and a focus on Africa going forward because of the endowment which we are so blessed with. I mean, finally, we look at the energy fuel commodities. Thermal coal, as I said, will continue to be very much with us. And in countries like Botswana, which is nominally the last couple of years the home of this event, of the summit, has huge untapped, the largest untapped thermal coal resources on the continent. And that's very much going to be developed front and center as we go forward. Uranium also, massive endowment in Southern Africa, in Namibia, still in South Africa, particularly in tailings related to the old gold and uranium industry, and then the opportunity for new uranium mines throughout the African continent. And what we will hear later on in the conference from one of our delegates and sponsors and partners from GovEx, and we will hear all about what they're doing in the uranium space, which is very positive for our continent going forward. So these are some of the elements that I wanted to leave you with, to understand that we are in a whole new world. Things are changing, access to capital is going to change, and we have a great reason to be positive in Africa, given the endowment we have. So with that, I'd like to leave you with a few predictions that I see for commodities pricing, which fundamentally are going to underpin the development of mining and energy operations across the African continent in the next 10 years. And really, I'm looking at a gold price that certainly is going to, in that time frame, go beyond $3,500 an ounce. We're already seeing the major bankers of the world like JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, and others are all claiming that gold will be $3,000 an ounce by the end of 2021. That's certainly possible, and if the major bankers are saying it, given the amount of manipulation in the precious metals markets, I'm quite sure that that's going to be a reality. There are certainly pundits out there that are saying that gold should already be 5,000 and could reach 10,000. But I think the message we have to take is that this is all positive for the development of our industry. Silver, certainly above $100 an ounce. Platinum, I see it growing and maintaining itself around 1,500 plus. Palladium is well above 2,000 now, and I see it staying in that region as well. Copper, as I said, we have an incentive price level of around $11,000 a ton for new copper mine developments. And given the demand, I see certainly copper going to well beyond $12,000 a ton in the next decade. And then nickel, well, the incentive price for nickel, that's a very, very capital intensive metal to produce. And we're probably looking at around $22,000 a ton plus. It's currently sitting in around 13,700. So still got long legs and a long way to go. Cobalt is definitely going to go up again beyond its current price, particularly on the back of search for ethical production, which pretty much writes off most of the production out of the DRC, certainly from a perception point of view, even if it's not, you know, entirely factual. But I see cobalt going to well beyond $90 a pound. Zinc certainly can stretch beyond $3,500 a ton, given supply and demand factors, and again driven by the green economy. There's certainly zinc battery technology out there that has a huge energy density and is going to demand greater and greater amounts of zinc production. And lastly, uranium. Well, uranium has dropped off its bottom since October 2016, and it's now sitting at around the low $30 per pound. But certainly there's, as the long-term contracts come up for new bids for long-term supply for the major nuclear utilities globally, certainly I see uranium at well north of $75 a pound within the next 10 years. Some people are saying it could be 150 plus, but certainly I'm quite confident that 75 plus is a good prediction. So I think with those positive predictions, we have a lot to look forward to. And we look forward to this conference and this event. We have got a great lineup of speakers again. I'm going to see you again later. I will be chairing at least one of the panels, and I'm looking forward to the debate, the discussion, and hopefully we're going to see some, as we have in the past, some real integration of developers, of financiers, of government institutions that we can band together in order to continue to develop this mineral and energy economy on this great continent of ours. So thank you very much again for your time. Thanks to Andy and his team for putting this together, and we look forward to continuing with the event in the next 2 days. Thank you very much.